So I wanted to ask you, you're from Rhode Island. What brought you to Austin?
So it's a bit of a long story, but I'll try to condense it as much as I can. So I had an actual hair metal band in 2000, between 2010 and 2013, called Dreamer, up in Rhode Island. And how that came to be is I had another band called Last One Standing, and this producer from New York liked what he heard, but he thought that the sound wasn't quite developed. So we went to New York to make an album. It was called Turn It Up. It's probably out there on YouTube. You can find it. But
Yeah.
we morphed the band from Last One Standing to Dreamer, and then I spent 3 years playing, opening for bigger bands, building a sizable fan base up there. And we actually got contacted by Roadrunner Records. Now, come to find out, it was an intern who worked at Roadrunner Records, but still, we got all excited. But when, he's like, I can't do anything, the label's not interested, well, then the band fell apart, right? Because everybody was like, oh, that was our one shot, everybody quit. So I actually, at that point, got a full-time job working for the electric company up there and just stopped doing music. Well, out of the blue, that same producer who did the Dreamer record called me up in 2015. And he goes, hey, what are you doing? He goes, I see you're not really doing music anymore. I was like, no, I'm done. Like, I'd even cut my hair short and everything. And he goes, you're not done. He goes, get back together with your brother and come to Austin. He goes, this is where it's happening. He's like, put a band together. We'll do an EP or a record and start, building up, things down here. So I thought about it, and, not to make a long story longer, but I ended up getting laid off from the electric company. So I said, screw it, I'm going to Austin. And then here I am.
Yeah, it's interesting that we've got basically two different generations of guys here doing music, Jason and Christian. Jason's from the day, obviously, where, you got noticed by playing a live show, and then you got signed to a major label, and then the things that come with it, the tours, the videos on MTV, that sort of thing. Christian now is of the generation where it's much more DIY. As you said earlier, it makes more sense to release singles rather than try to put together a whole album. So it's interesting here, the contrast, because you're both, in Austin based, but Jason comes from a generation where the approach towards making it, I guess, was different than it is now.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to see. And, Jason's somebody I look up to, and I can call him a friend now since we've had lunch. But, it's just interesting, the dichotomy, like the two different worlds. But, just people, it's kind of like you got to evolve or you die. You know what I mean? It's survival of the fittest, as much as, everybody wants to talk about the scene and camaraderie. And it's like, yeah, that exists. But, at the end of the day, you got to figure out what's best for you,
So for people that aren't familiar with your music, how would you describe your sound?
Hard rock.
Yeah. I hear a lot of 80s influence in there, which is always interesting to me because I grew up on that sort of thing. You're much younger than we are. So I always find it interesting when people find their inspiration from a generation that I wouldn't think was necessarily the generation that would inspire you.
Well, reason why I know there's a lot of 80s influence, but the reason why I don't say 80s metal is because before I even discovered any of the stuff from the 80s, because my dad is a huge metal, hard rock fan, yada, yada, yada. And so is my mom. But my first band was Kiss. That's what I discovered. So for me, they're hard rock. They're not a hair band, even though in the 80s they might have been labeled that. But that's where I started, was old school classic rock or hard rock. So Kiss, Zeppelin, Sabbath, all that stuff from my dad. And then it just kind of migrated from there as I would just discover more and more music.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear all those influences and I love it. It's very it's melodic, but it's got some chunk, it's just good, straightforward hard rock. And so you mentioned your parents. So I was going to ask if you come from a musical background, musical family, who, did your family members inspire you? When did you get your first guitar? Take us back to little Christian being 5 years old, growing up at home. What's it sound like?
Well, it actually, so when I was 6, I actually started with playing the clarinet in first grade. I don't really recall what got me into that, but I played music for a little bit. And then when I was 11, my dad got excited because he got his hands on a bunch of bootleg tapes, sorry, VHS tapes, if people remember those, of Kiss concerts from the 1970s. And there was 2 concerts in particular that I would watch over and over. There was one from Largo, Maryland on the Dynasty tour in 79, I think. And then there was one, and this was the one that did it for me, was night 2 of the Love Gun tour at Houston, Texas at the Summit, September 2nd, 1977. And I'm weird where I remember dates and everything. And I just remember my dad putting it on, and you see them come down the risers, and they're opening with I Stole Your Love. And Paul's doing the big hand motions and everything. And I was like, what is this? You got the pyro going off, all that. And then when they start off the song, he's strumming chords and pointing to the girls in the front row. And I was like, I want to do that. And that's what got me into it. So then I saved up as much money as I could. And for my 12th birthday, I bought my first guitar. But to take it back to what you're saying, my parents are not musical at all. My dad wanted to play guitar when he was a kid, but he said he never got the encouragement from his parents. So once I got interested into it, and then I told my brother he's playing drums, once we got into music, my dad did everything to make it happen. Like he spent, it'd probably make you sick how much money he spent on us.
Oh, I'm sure. I have a 15-year-old son.
He knows all about it.
I know all about it. Yeah. So is your brother your current drummer?
No, my brother, he's doing his own thing. We'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
Is he still in Texas?
Yeah, he lives up in Coppers Cove.
Okay. All right.
So, what was the Kiss VHS tapes? I've seen both of the shows that you're talking about, and I can see why. I mean, Kiss was the band for me too, and definitely one of the bands for Jason. And the 2 shows you're talking about, that's a lot of eye candy and a lot of ear candy for a young brain. So I can see why that took hold. And then, so how did you go about, playing your first gigs or making a name for yourself early on? And how old were you at that time?
So my first show would have been December 3rd, 2005. There's not a lot of venues in Rhode Island. There never has been. And especially for kids, we can't play clubs. So what was I was freshman year of high school, I was 14 or 15 and 14 because 2005. And what we did was we rented out the local Elks Club, and I would just pass out flyers to all my high school friends. We made an EP and everybody bought it, and we packed the place. We had like 180 people show up, if I recall. And but the only tragic thing about that night is because it was around Christmas time, we had a couple kids, haters that hated us, that decided to go across the street and trash somebody's Christmas decorations. So all the money we made for the show, we had to pay them for all the decorations that got trashed. So we made no money. But I was still like, this is cool. This is awesome. And then that started. And then that was with Last One Standing. We kind of played a lot of clubs. But really, when I turned 18, 19, when I went from Last One Standing to Dreamer, that's when we started getting, able to offer, play for bigger bands and stuff like that. That's where I opened for Hawthorne Heights, Hollywood Undead, all that remained. It was mostly hard rock because around that time, 2010, 2011, 2012, even 2013, a lot of the hard rock 80s bands that are touring now, they weren't touring at the time. So it was still like the tail end of the emo wave, a lot of different alternative indie genres. So we would just take any show we could, and we would just win people over. And because everybody would always say, oh man, this sounds like a throwback to this. There was like that nostalgia factor, which was never really my intention. I just wanted to play music that had to do with my roots, like I just write however I feel. But that's kind of like how we did it. We played all over New England, did some shows in New York, all that stuff. And then, ipso facto, here we are.